Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, or just Star Wars if you know you're like a die-hard fan or whatever, is written and directed by George Lucas and stars like Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, who else? Peter Mayhew, James Earl Jones, and also David Prowse as the body of Darth Vader, and so many legends. And you know, I don't have to say it, but this film is a classic and it's a masterpiece, and there's literally nothing wrong with this film. It is as close to perfect as you can get. Obviously, when we get to Empire Strikes Back, I guess, takes it, you know, one step further. On a filmmaking perspective alone, this film is pretty much perfect. Now, okay, wait. I'm just gonna get it out the way now. Of course, the extended edition, I guess I want to talk about the extended edition. The scene with Jabba the Hutt, which has some of the worst CGI ever, should just be forgotten and destroyed. However, the one good thing about the extended cut is the addition of Biggs Darklighter, who, if you haven't seen the extended cut, he's basically like a pilot for the Rebel Alliance, and he's mates with Luke when they were on Tatooine. And in the original, like the theatrical cut, you don't really see him. They cut him out just because they thought that it affected the pacing of the film. But I thought that the addition of Biggs was really good because, you know, you get to see Luke have another relationship aside from just Han or Ben or Leia. But spoiler alert, and this whole like video will be spoiler filled, when he dies, Biggs, it makes, you know, it much more effective because you get to see the look of, you know, heartbreak on Luke's face. But anyway, that's the extended cut. So yeah, from a filmmaking perspective, what George Lucas did with this film is incredible. It's groundbreaking. The use of practical effects and just the attention to detail is unlike anything you'll ever see. Of course, people are going to look back on this and be like, oh, it had a lot of cliches, the hero who wants to run away from home, the damsel in distress who's not really a damsel because she's a lot more capable than she lets on, the evil bad guy, the charismatic anti-hero. But this is really the film that started it all, and actually, if you think about it really, I feel like the whole sort of Star Wars trilogy, especially A New Hope, feels a lot like a Western. I mean, it takes place on a, you know, planet with sand, and you have all these character stereotypes, and so in many ways I feel like it's sort of a Western sci-fi clash. I was rewatching the film the other day just to, you know, get my thoughts for the review, and I was just thinking, like, when this film came out, it must have been so, like, shocking. People must have been like, whoa, what is this? It's our equivalent of like Avatar, because, you know, when we first saw Avatar, sort of my generation, we were like, oh my god, this is sort of like groundbreaking visual effects and storytelling. But everything about this film is just so original. No one has ever attempted to do anything like this at that time. And that alone makes it, you know, a classic, makes it a masterpiece. But again, the directing by George Lucas is inspirational. I mean, like, obviously with the later films, it's not that good, but just if you look at this film alone, like, George Lucas did an insane job blending practical with CGI. It's just incredible what he achieved with the film. And the acting, Mark Hamill is brilliant, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, so good, and obviously James Earl Jones as Darth Vader. This guy has one of the most insane voices on the planet. He's an absolute legend, and, you know, I love the whole thing with David Prowse and his not so good relationship with George Lucas. David Prowse obviously played the body of Darth Vader. His lines were actually pretty hilarious if you watch some of the stuff he says before it gets dubbed over by James Earl Jones.
Start tearing this ship apart piece by piece until you find those tapes. Find the passengers of this vessel. I want them alive.
You know what you're talking about. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
And I can't talk about A New Hope without talking about Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obviously, there are a couple of plot holes here and there in terms of relating this film with Revenge of the Sith. But I mean, that came along later, and Alec Guinness was absolutely brilliant. I guess, like, a minor sort of thing that I have with this film, which isn't really its fault, but it's the fact that when Obi-Wan fights Darth Vader, the fight isn't anything mind-blowing. It's a pretty boring, dull fight, actually. But in my opinion, it's really more about the conflict between these two characters, you know, the sort of the inner conflict, the psychological conflict, and not so much the physical one, you know, with the lightsabers, and which is why I think it's fine. But obviously, just in terms of the fighting, it's nowhere near as impressive as some of the stuff we've got with The Force Awakens, or with Revenge of the Sith, or any of the prequel films. It's just not as good just because they didn't have the technology or the money. And, you know, the two, I think, best things in terms of the storytelling is that, number one, it's insanely simple, and number two is that it takes its time. Let's talk about the simplicity first. Let's say you look at a film like Attack of the Clones, and I said this in my review for Attack of the Clones. it is insanely complicated. What's going on? Who's trying to kill who? Why is this person hiring this person to kill that person instead of doing it himself? Why is this going on? What's this Senate meeting? Oh my god, what's that? None of that is in this film. A New Hope, it's so simple. You know, you have the plans for the Death Star. You have to, you know, rescue Leia. You have to defeat the enemy. It's very, very simple. And because it's so simple and straightforward, it's really through the details and the acting and the directing that really elevate the material. And thankfully, it does, because obviously this film has one of the most classic stories of all time. And of course, I cannot talk about this film without talking about the incredible classic score by John Williams. John Williams, I think, is known to most as the greatest composer of all time, and his score for Star Wars, I think, is some of his finest work. It's incredible, and I think we'll talk more about the score when I review Empire Strikes Back. But it's incredible. And again, this film is incredibly simple, and let's talk about the fact that this film takes its time. One of the things that I noticed when rewatching this film was that almost half of the film takes place on Tatooine, and I think they actually leave Tatooine at around the 1 hour 50-minute or so mark. That's insane, because they actually take their time to develop the character of Luke, who, again, I'm going to say this again, played insanely well by Mark Hamill, and his meeting with C-3PO and R2-D2, you know, having that feel natural, taking their time. Like any other filmmaker, I feel like, in any other film that would come out nowadays, Luke would just have bought R2-D2 instead of having that other droid crash and then having to get R2-D2 as sort of a refund. Any other film, it would just been, okay, I will buy C-3PO and R2-D2 right away, instead of taking that time to make their meeting feel natural. Their meeting with old Ben, and when he's sort of describing the story of Darth Vader, it all feels so natural, and that's because it takes its time. I mean, look at Blade Runner 2049 that just came out. It's so good because it takes its time, it feels natural. All the, you know, the big moments, they feel earned, you know, and they're effective because it takes its time to build up to that, just like this film. And another thing that I love so much about this film, and another thing that you're almost never gonna find in a movie nowadays, especially a big sort of franchise movie, is that it stands on its own. Like, of course, in the film there are mentions of the Emperor and the Force and stuff that make you intrigued to see more, but at that time they didn't plan on having sequels, I'm guessing. We're making one film, how do we make this as good as possible? And, you know, that's it. They weren't thinking about 3 more films, they weren't thinking of setting up an extended universe, they weren't thinking of prequels or any of that. I mean, we don't know. I mean, George Lucas could have been planned the whole thing, but you get what I mean. It's a standalone film, it works on its own, and because it's its own film, that's what makes it really good. I don't have to say that this film is a classic, that it's changed people's lives, that it started so many different, you know, forms of like pop culture and all that, because everyone knows it. It's Star Wars, and that's why I'm going to give Star Wars, or Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, an A+. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned for my review for The Empire Strikes Back. Thank you.